everyone. My name is Annalie Davis, and I'm a visual artist and the founding director of the Fresh Milk art platform. Today, Fresh Milk is recording its first conversation as part of its new slow reading program here in the Colleen Lewis Reading Room. I'd like to welcome all listeners to our first slow reading conversation. And for those of you who are not familiar with Fresh Milk or Colleen Lewis, I'll tell you more about them. Then I'll speak briefly about this exciting new program we're launching, introduce our contributors, and hand over to Shivanee Ramlochan, who will engage in an unhurried and insightful conversation with Ark Ramsay. Fresh Milk is an artist-led initiative that supports and responds to Caribbean visual artists through programs that provide opportunities for professional and creative development while fostering a thriving art community. We've been around since 2011, and we work in Barbados and across the wider polyphonic Caribbean region. Colleen Lewis was my very dear friend who died in Barbados on September 6, 2006. Some of the books in the reading room have come from Colleen's collection, acquired while she was doing an art history degree at the University of Toronto, followed by a master's in cultural studies at UWI Cave Hill campus. The Colleen Lewis Reading Room reflects her interest in and love for the arts. She wrote about art and she collected art. The Reading Room has been established in her name to keep her memory alive while reflecting the generosity of her spirit. Our small collection of about 3,500 books is freely available by appointment and is located in St. George, Barbados. What is the slow reading program at the Colleen Lewis Reading Room? Well, in an attempt to build broader awareness of our collection, which focuses mostly on contemporary visual arts with Caribbean literature, Caribbean history, and some other sections, I wanted to think about how we engage with the books, how we read in this time of overstimulation, and what happens when we hold a book in our hands and sit down somewhere quiet to read. What's the value of physical libraries in this time of the digital age? Some of you listening are more likely familiar with the slow food movement, advocating for clean food produced fairly, the antithesis to less healthy fast food produced industrially, or maybe the wider slow movement promoting a slower pace of living and a greater appreciation for experiences lived more fully. Similarly, with slow reading, readers might choose to engage more meaningfully with the book, reflect on and contemplate the material more deeply. Some readers might sub-vocalize, internally saying the words while reading. Others might join clubs and engage in discussions with others to reflect on them in different ways. We can also think about close reading, situated reading, associative reading, the many ways to read. In this very small scale reading room, we're thinking about building intimacy with our books while shaping a community of readers locally and across our archipelago, which brings us to today's conversation. Last year in 2024, supported by the Panta Rhea Foundation, Fresh Milk partnered with Sonia Farmer, the director of Poinciana Paper Press, to co-manage an 8-week Lucayan Archipelago Residency, which took place in the Bahamas from September to November 2024. The residents were Barbadian writer Ark Ramsay, who's here with me today, and Puerto Rican artist Joko Feliciano. The aim was for Ark and Joko to get to know one another and the physical environment of the Bahamas through an ecological lens, and to collaborate on a response through writing and the crafts of book arts. The outcome was a limited edition of 6 beautifully made books, showcasing Joko's work as a bookmaker and Ark's poem titled A Prayer in Motion. And today we want to shine a light on this gorgeous work. While Joko isn't here in person, she's here in spirit and will share some thoughts with us through the video. But it's my pleasure now to introduce today's 2 discussants who will slowly take us through the making of this object, the physical environment that influenced its form, and the words on its pages. I'm sorry you all can't hold it in your hands, but we'll do our best to make it come to life for you. So here with me is Ark Ramsay, a non-binary writer based in Barbados. Their work has appeared in or is forthcoming from the A-Line, Journal of Progressive Thought, Small Axe, Gertrude Press, Meridian, Ada, The Rumpus, Passages North, and the Gulf Coast. They have been a finalist for the inaugural Story Foundation Prize through Story magazine and received an honorable mention in 9th Letter's 2021 Literary Award for Nonfiction. In 2024, they were shortlisted for both the Wasafiri New Writing Prize and the 2024 Commonwealth Short Story Award. Ark attended the Swatch Peace Hotel Artist Residency in Shanghai in 2023 and the inaugural Lucayan Archipelago Artist Residency in the Bahamas last year, managed by Fresh Milk with Poinciana Paper Press. They received an MFA from the Ohio State University. Joining us from the sister Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is Shivanee Ramlochan, Trinidadian poet, essayist, and critic. From 2012 to 2017, Shivanee served as lead critic for the Trinidad Guardian's Sunday Art section, covering literature, visual, and performance arts. In 2018, her critical interpretive essay was published in Maria Nunes's In a World of Their Own, Carnival Dreamers and Makers, Photographs by Maria Nunes, published by Robert and Christopher Publishers. Shivanee's most recent art writing has been informed by her creative communion with curator and contemporary artist Andil Gosain, including her 2025 essay on visual artist Lenore Aline's Queering Cane that was made with Andil for catalogue inclusion in the untimely cancelled Nature's Wild exhibition. Shivanee's own full-length publications are Everyone Knows I Am a Haunting, Peepal Press, 2017, and the forthcoming Witch Hindu and Unkillable, Essays on Indo-Caribbean Women's Disobedience. She has worked in Caribbean literary and cultural arts development for over 15 years and currently serves as festival and program manager for the Bocas Lit Fest, the Caribbean's largest Anglophone book festival. Shivanee is queer and believes in intersectional liberation. A very warm welcome to Ark and to Shivanee, who I'll hand over to and get the ball rolling. But maybe, Shivanee, you could start off by telling us where you're located so that we might feel a little bit closer to where you are. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annalie, and thank you to the Fresh Milk team for all of your visionary work in making spaces like this possible. Slow and contemplative spaces. We need them, and we benefit from them. I'm in Trinidad at the moment, where it is very hot. I would say unseasonably so, but I think in the conversation that Ark and I are poised to have, we will indeed cover that seasonal extremes are very much the normative way of being and feeling. So I might think it is hot, and indeed I do, but it is a kind of heat. I'm very aware, and I think about this every day in some way, conscious or not, that the rising temperatures and pressures, environmental, political, and otherwise, are only on the ascendancy. And then how do we rise to meet that urgency? This might sound like a very intense way of saying where I am, but it happens to be true.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll hand over to you, Shivanee. Thank you.
So good to be in this space with you. And as much as we're far apart, I mean, maybe a very good swimmer could make the trip from Trinidad to Barbados. I cannot. I don't have those skills. But you feel like you're close to me, and I feel close to you. So I want to thank you first for that closeness, which I think has been a direct product of how you and I greet each other wherever we are in the world.
It's interesting that on the way here, I was thinking about how we met and how our friendship has been sustained through postcards and letters that stretched for, maybe the last almost 10 years. And sometimes I won't hear from you in that traditional sense for a while, and then I'll go to my mailbox and there will be Shivanee Ramlochan. And it is, in a sense, the slowest form of communication and the slowest form of intimacy. But we've managed to use that as a way to stay alive.
We have done. And maybe it shouldn't be comforting to me, but I often think if/when the world ends as we know it, I hope we have access to the tactile, handwritten forms of communication that have served us and those before us for so long. I hope that if the world is on fire, more on fire, there will be letters and postcards. This might be a naive hope, but I cling to it.
And the postal service. I'm okay with losing like certain internet infrastructure, but the hard workers of the postal service, uh, I hope that they somehow through like some arcane means figure out how to keep their structure alive and well. Whereas outside is roasting.
Yes, I mean, I give thanks for Annalie choosing to be a very intentional postmistress during this year's Bocas Lit Fest, because this is how this beautiful book came to me. Annalie very carefully, I remember it was presented to me in a sealed plastic bag for safekeeping, and there it was nestled within. And I had one evening to be with it because this was in the thick of the festival itself. And I remember taking it back to the Airbnb where I was staying while I was working on the festival and being completely, I want to say transported, but it is more than transportation, in that you and Joko took me to a place and to several places that I knew were real and persistent and concerned with environmental ruin, and also felt incredibly close. It was like on that night, sitting with the chapbook, I could feel the immediate urgencies of our Caribbean pressed in around me, which made then leaving sadly relinquishing the chapbook, because as Annalie mentioned in her introduction, there are only 6 beautiful copies in the world. And so I wasn't allowed to keep it. But returning it and then heading back into a festival environment of literary celebration while keeping these thoughts very much at my core. So I want to thank you and also thank Annalie by proxy for the way in which the chapbook journeyed to me. It feels important.
Yeah, I'd also like to mention here that I wasn't actually present during the physical creation of it. I got ill at the very end of the program, and so I received these sort of like beautiful updates from Sonia and Joko as they worked through the process of like turning this thing that I had left as a PDF file into a book. And it's a very like bookmaking and publishing, and so many things are like abstracted from writers that mostly you never get to see the process. You don't get to see like, oh, if I put this page here. And so it was actually it was beautiful. And it was also done under such time pressure. Uh, so kudos to their immense talents that we are missing in this room right now.
Yeah, I've had the real privilege of seeing Sonia Farmer at work in her space in the Bahamas. And so to get a window into the kind of very intentional artistry and focus and patience that goes into making an art book, a work of art that we get to hold and touch, I take that very seriously, not least because I know I'm wholly incapable of it. But
Yeah,
but it
but
must have been something. Well, tell me, if you don't mind, what it was like to hold the book as an object for the first time.
the first time I held the book, it was, I mean, you go through all these feelings, these elation, joy, sorrow, like the yin yang of experience. But like one thing that it actually really reminded me of is how much I had learned from the two of them. Even the formal construction of what I had written was greatly influenced by Sonia's work reading the Barbadian essayist Ligon, the historical essayist Ligon. And so it's interesting on a formal level to hold the book and then be like, oh, this is very much like this fractured way of crafting something and pulling it together and stitching it. Oh, that's very much formally influenced as well by the work around me. So I realized while holding the book that it wasn't just the exchange of ideas that led to like a content influence or what was inside of the pages, but actually like a formal and structural shift had happened in the way I was writing essays. And that was really cool to see, like in a physical way.
It doesn't surprise me at all that you are exactly the kind of writer and thinker who is and who remains this open to the ways in which other artists' voices and hands and hearts in the work profoundly and radically shift, sometimes seismically so, the ways in which you yourself return to text, not simply the text you made with them and through them and alongside them, but the work you then go on to produce. It only signals everything I've long suspected and admired about your own abundant generosity and ways of being in the world, Ark.
I don't know what to say to that.
It's
Except I
only
have
true.
a
Just like
deep
have
love,
it wash over
a
you.
deep love for you. This is an unfair conversation because we're just doing our thing. Like this is the conversation we'd be having anyway. Only this time there's cameras on us.
Yes, and Fresh Milk gets to see everything.
Mhm.
And so does everyone else when this airs. I mean, Un Santo a la Vez, a prayer in motion. I told you, I sent preparatory questions, thoughts, invitations to think together. But I did say, and I meant it fully, there are ways in which I could be thinking about and living alongside this book that would take hours and hours of deep conversation and laughter and rage and interpretive dance, and long walks along various Caribbean coastlines that may be, as we speak, receding. And so what it's hard to, I think, make a question that then asks you about the costs of doing that work. Because maybe cost is not, I don't mean an economy of it, but what things welled up in you to face all of this. I never misunderstand or mistake that the act of witnessing in order to write into it is a cavernous endeavor. And there are so many rooms that we have to occupy or are called to occupy as writers for that. So maybe this is an invitation to walk us through some of those rooms that you felt poised to fill upon encountering all this.
I think the first thing that comes to mind is that the wick, the candle length of my own utopian belief in the magic ability of human beings to restore what they have damaged. I think that has been burning out over the last couple of years. And in its place has obviously a surge of bitterness and resentment floods in. I think that's a natural and human response to feeling failed. And I think so many people feel failed. And I think so many people are carrying around this center of bitterness and resentment. Why bother? Why this? Why that? And this extends beyond climate, right? The current political moment, fascism, everything. Why bother? And so when I approached writing about this, I thought, okay, well, I want to write about climate grief. And over, what I realized was that the grief was like a blanket. It just came down over me, and I couldn't find a way out of it. It was like the idea that we could save ourselves was burning down to the absolute wick, and there was nothing to replace. Like down here was the grief. And I was thinking, okay, well, how do I get out of this? How do I get out of this? It's so large. It's so encompassing. It's like a hand at my throat. What do I do? What do I do with these feelings? Um, and I, at the time, I am really blessed to have a writing mentor in the form of Elaine Savory. And week after week, I would send her this. And week after week, she would challenge me that the climate grief is useless. Climate grief is a
Mhm.
pointless endeavor. You feel this thing, you feel sorry, it stultifies you, it keeps you from doing anything else. And I kept thinking, but I feel this way. So whether it's useful or not, I feel this way. So how do I get beyond it? And this poem is a very incomplete attempt to figure out if there is a way beyond grief through grief, which is, in retrospect, a lovely line that I don't really know how to enact. Like, I wish that the essay had taken me to a place where I could provide some kind of instruction to myself on where to go from here. But yeah, the confrontation of grief in its rawest was, yeah, that's the hardest part of this essay for me.
I have to say, I'm profoundly relieved you didn't excise that grief or medicinalize it or put it somewhere safer or inoffensive. I think on every page, in almost every of the numbered movements that make up this poem, essay, lamentation, we must contend with a sorrow that we cannot escape from, and indeed, as the text tells us, is almost entirely of our human making. This I think was one of the most profound gifts of this work to me, is that it made me, again, in the space of a very compressed night, truly look at the limitations of what my own behaviors have been, and perhaps the behaviors of my own ancestors as human animals. This idea that we are really never far from our animal states is very important to my own work, as you know. But then what have we done with our most feral animal natures? How have they not saved us or saved the world from the devastations we are enacting? And so it felt like a reckoning. It felt like a beautifully housed document that was also an undeniable knife in the dark. Not that it stabbed me, but that I felt its sharpness. And I think grief hones that blade, without it, I can't imagine the work. But then there is, as we've said, this radical honesty that you bring to every page, to each act of witnessing, whether you reach into the past to comment on what former folks from the era of old colonialism, because colonialism is never dead, whatever we call it now, have done and how they've behaved, to how we behave, perhaps as a response, or perhaps in defiance of those behaviors. I mean, it makes me very curious to think about each of the references that you've included from historical research feels almost painstakingly chosen. But to you, was that a very natural process? Did they come up referentially immediately? Did you have to search hard for them? Or were they waiting in the archive for you to say, yeah, write about me, attend to me, please?
I'm smiling because part of the program, we did a journey to Abaco, the islands of Abaco. And the organization that we stayed with, they had a little library. And on day one, we picked through it. And they had a lot of like wonderful marine biology books, but they also had the biography of Alexander Humboldt. And the internet was choppy and there wasn't much else to do. So I just sat around reading Alexander Humboldt's biography, and the way he ended up fitting within the essay as this contrapuntal voice within his own era, but also the insanity with which he viewed the world, because to come upon what was being viewed as like productive extraction and call it destruction is a profoundly radical thing. Even today, you can have somebody who works for an oil company, is a specialist in fracking, and that is productive extraction to most of the world. And then when you flip the lens and you look at it and you see what is the cost, the actual economic, human, social, long-term cost of this action, you are looked at as if like, why are you bothering with that? Why are you bothering with that, right? Like we have these engines of thought and engines of living, and if you want to put a spoke in the way this is working, well then you're an insane person. And I found myself thinking, oh well, Humboldt, the radicalization of his thought and the way he was completely disrespected for so many years within the scientific community, because like he brought this notion that actually we are all an interconnected web. The whole world actually is not discrete systems. They're not discrete biological systems here, and they don't interact. I mean, now we're like, yeah, that's obvious. But our future generations are going to be, if we get there, if we make them, if we find them, they're going to be really disappointed in the things that we let slip.
I don't know how faced with the world 1 or 2 or 3 generations from now, when we've gone, how our future inheritors will record us. That's what I have to say. I can't even say that I hope it's with kindness. I hope that they tell the truth. I hope that documents exactly like this one persist, and live in a burning and drowning world, because we're doing both at the same time. But I don't expect sympathy. And this text, I think, is also remarkable because it doesn't offer any ready sympathy to anyone, not even the earth, which one might think, approaching this text, perhaps without any pre-knowledge of what it might contain, that it would be a ready elegy / dirge for a planet that is dying. But, forgive me if I'm mistaken, but that's not at all what I received. I strongly got the sense that the earth will fight us back as much as it is able to do so, and has chances of navigating life post-human. And we can probably talk a bit about how those chances will be flawed, but I have always morbidly relished in the thought of the earth surviving us once we're gone.
Yeah, that actually makes me think of my own thought trajectory as it comes to climate. I used to be extremely interested privately and even within my academic work on, techno-utopias and philosophical ideas of AI. And, that was what I was studying. I was like, this is the future. Human beings will supersede our constraints, right? I was reading a lot about like the engineering of human beings to be and to excel within a world that they would conquer even more. There would be this sort of like expansion of the human into like this third space, right? We would take the moon, we'd take Mars, we'd colonize. It was very Star Trekky, Star Wars, without the admission of the fact that there are planets within those universes that are sandy dust heaps of destruction. And so as I began to become more ecologically aware and began to think about it, I always had like a morally absolute framework at the back of my head that has propelled the way I approach a lot of ethics. And it's hard to arrive at that or to use that modality when you are talking about climate, because it can be very self-defeating. Like, if this is right and this is wrong, and you do any wrong for any reason, you have failed. And this morally absolute framework doesn't actually motivate many people to engage with climate, engage with any kind of ecological action. And so at the end of the day, you have more people falling into bitterness and despair who fuel the engine that will eventually become, this insouciant earth will shake us off. At a certain point, we are not the first large, might be the first large mammal. We don't have other evidence, but we're not the first megafauna that this planet has sort of just been like, and enough of that, and enough of that. But there's this what we are, I think, we might be the first one that believes differently. And I think that might be the most dangerous thing about human beings, is that we have invented a story about ourselves that we are different. We are so far removed from not just the animal world, but the reality of being a creature on a planet like this. We've invented this story that we are a necessary load-bearing component. If we go, the planet goes, and that is the farthest from the truth. But we've accepted the story. We live in it. We love in it. We go birth to death within this story of ourselves. And we're finally in the reckoning period.
It makes me think that everything we do is purposed and is built on the exoskeleton and the ossuary. I'm thinking of all the good words for bones I know, and stay with me because this is relevant.
So good.
We're building on bone work that we haven't even fully deserved, I totally believe ritualistically that bones are important to a person's personal mythos. But what we've made, super factories and weapons of mass destruction and nuclear armaments, we've done that on the graveyards we haven't even properly inherited ourselves, because everything that's dead and rich and loamy within them, for the most part, for a long, long time, had nothing to do with us whatsoever. But here we stand on them, squishing about. Willfully, or maybe with great hubris, ignoring that they will have their say. The bog as a primordial force understands us better, I think, than we do ourselves, and in its moments of infinite calculation already knows exactly how our bones will taste. And it makes me think, not for nothing, of the beautiful generosity with which you introduce the reader of this text to Marana Sati, this Tibetan. You introduced me to it. It was new to me as well. And it's been a great gift to think of since then. So thank you for that. The Tibetan Buddhist teaching that invokes this meditation on not just one kind of death, but the reality that I will die, that everyone in my interlinked communities will also die, and the world that sustains all this will perish too. And it makes me intensely curious about how you yourself, especially in the aftermath of making this text, have lived with that concept. Have there been shifts in it? Do you go through this death cycle in the same way? Is it held in the same kind of frame, or has there been a cracking open, a difference?
So, more information on Marana Sati. There's a very beautiful sutra that kind of tries to, or is the basis for a lot of that meditative practice, but it's a very simple story where the Buddha says, he's standing in front of followers and he says, has anybody been thinking about the moment of their death? And the first follower says, yes, I meditate as if I could die next month, which is the wrong answer. The next one says, I meditate as if I could die next week, which is the wrong answer. And then finally it's 1 day, 1 hour, and they're all wrong, because the final answer, which is the one that the Buddha accepts, is I meditate as if I could be dead within the next moment of breath. And that does sound horribly morbid, because an actual Maranasati meditation might ask you to sit within the room you are in right now and imagine the roof falling. Imagine yourself disappearing. Imagine who would find you. Imagine how they would feel. It's an intense exercise of reality facing. But the point of it is to turn away or to accept the reality and the inevitability and like the isness of it, and to accept also that that should be a motivation towards life, like living within a more honest and aware mentality, because you're holding death within the next second, right? The roof might fall in, the feed might end. That might be the end of Ark Ramsay. And so what does that actually
Yeah.
mean for my living? And I'm a terrible Maranasati practicer myself. It's an incredibly confronting and hard practice. I do it when I feel like I can, and sometimes I'll make it halfway through, sometimes I'll stop, sometimes I'll make it all the way and I'll feel better for it, sometimes I'll feel terrible for it, because it's a lifelong learning experience. And when I brought it to this text, I was trying to look around for other methods that embraced and redirected the power of grief. Because within Maranasati, you don't sit and grieve for these things. You accept them as what they are. And then you redirect the energy into how you want to live within the next breath, within the next hour, week, month, year. It's a very powerful practice. It's a very powerful form of redirection that I wasn't able to find within any other of the structures that I had been raised with, or any other of the systems that I knew more familiarly. And since writing this, ironically, I've gone through a period of incredible death anxiety for the last couple of months, because I believe too that in the process of trying to internalize these things, facing them is horrifying. Like you don't want to really face it. That's what most of our modern world is built off of, right? You don't want to face the reality of these things. But I think if we can't face the reality of what will become of our world if we continue at our current actions, and might now be irreversible, if we refuse to face those inevitabilities, what does that say about us? What does that say about the future we're creating? Are we just gonna, it's the party at Great Gatsby. Are we just gonna stand here while this whole house falls apart? Like we know it's all gonna implode. Why are we still here? Why are we still acting like this?
I wish I had an answer. I co-edited an anthology of Caribbean climate justice called Writing for Our Lives earlier this year. It was launched at the Book Study Fest, and Diana McCauley was my co-editor. And I was tasked with writing a brief introduction for this extraordinary gathering of Caribbean voices in all genres, thinking about this same question that we're facing now, that this text also beautifully and angrily confronts. What do we do with where we are now? With the knowledge that it could also already be too late. And I had to face up to the fact, in the 800 words or so of the introduction, that the value of this book in my hand, or in a bookseller's shopfront, or in someone's suitcase crossing the parts of the Caribbean to be with someone else, might not save a life in the way that we understand lives to be saved in a very literal sense. But I have to believe in the necessity of the action of these words, and that words are not only action containing, but actionable, right? That if we cannot trust our governments and our political leaders and our thought influencers to tell the truth about what we face, We've got to trust our artists and our dreamers and our dissidents and our activists, that it must come from there, but has to come from somewhere. And one thing your text taught me, retaught me, is that governments lie. They lie so much. Regimes fill the population with falsehoods about who has survived, about the rising toll of the dead. It cannot have been easy, Ark, to sit with the weight of these lies, these superstructural lies, and choose to tell the truth about them.
I've been thinking about this question a lot since you posed it to me, this idea of truth-telling. And what's been spinning up in my mind is one of the documents that I looked at for this this essay was created by real estate developers, and I'm assuming people who just want to figure out where to put the next mega structure. But it is essentially a tool that uses current predictive modeling for seawater rise. And you can, with a little scale, go up 5 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet, and you can see what becomes of territories and what becomes of cities. You know, New York turns into a bunch of islands. The Bahamas all but disappears at like 15 feet because they have these internal, like water comes up from the middle of the island as well. Certain parts of the coast in Barbados disappear. And it's very interesting because on the one hand, this is the reality. This is the tool that is being built for money making and instruction and guidance, but money making. And then in the same breath, you have like the Barbados government pushing strange and environmentally destructive development in like Bridgetown, or along the south coast, which if you follow the model, will be gone. So are we gambling now? There's a fantastic book about seawater, about water rise in general by a journalist named Jeff Goodall. I can't remember the title of it exactly, but he interviews a lot of real estate moguls in Miami. And what comes up over and over again is we're all gambling. If one of us pulls out, we all pull out. So we're all in, all hands in. We know that this is completely irresponsible behavior. We know it's all going to go, but the real estate, the value, the monetary value of this, we can't just let it go. So people are, now it's just speculation. Now it's just dice rolling. You know, am I buying too close? Will it disappear? And so the truth becomes sealed and caged within the raw desire to make the most out of what is left. And that's going to happen more and more and more. And it falls to artists and writers and dissidents to be the kind of people that can model defiance for other people. I think more and more about the political responsibility. I used to get in countless arguments with other writers about, you know, writers are not supposed to be, writing is not inherently political. Yes, it is. Expletive that.
Yes.
The role of an artist is to be the voice that is laughed at until truth reveals that the mockery was hollow, and hopefully along the way enough people have been convinced that, you know, we cannot build a hotel here because the water will inundate it and we will all drown. Like, what is the plan? Again, where do we go from here? Yeah,
Ark, oh, darling
lobbing
Ark.
very easy question back across the net.
Yeah, I realized I just called you darling, which I had an internal sort of poll in my head about, can I make it through this recording for public consumption without addressing you with an endearment, I knew I would not be successful, which means I am successful, because that was always what it was meant to happen. I mean, I say this as an organizer of a literary festival that I'm very proud to work with, but I ask myself often, what am I doing as a writer? What are we doing as writers in between literary festivals and book launches? Because it's a wonderful life, and it has challenges like any other part of a public facing life, but that is often not the only real work. And increasingly to me, not the work with a capital W. How are we attending to life? And if I know, certainly if we aren't bringing the urgency of this and other urgencies, like the current genocide, into those spaces of literary festivals and book launches, then something is deficient. Something is not. Those are not the moves I strongly feel that we should be making. But to speak of motion, and perilously, it is very, very close to the point at which we're supposed to wrap up. I don't believe this has happened. This is fake news. Perhaps the last thing that we can discuss is motion. That this book is a prayer in motion. That at so many points in its narrative, when you feel the most rage, the most grief, the most sorrow, the most cognitive dissonance, you keep yourself in motion. You keep moving, whether it's through the various areas of the Lucayan Archipelago Residency space, movements you make in your own personal circumstances, the ways you put your body through its paces of an inability to cope, and then you cope because you're moving. What things did you discover? Yes, to write this text, but I also truly want to know about yourself in motion in this practice that you would not have known if you stood still to write it.
This is making me think directly about your idea of what more am I supposed to do. Because I have personally had this internal battle between moving and not moving, between staying and going, between this feeling of complete disconnection from the rail. Because sometimes as a writer, as an artist, you do this sort of like step back and separation. Your work is itself commentary. And so your work is sometimes so divorced from reality. Not in the sense where it's not commenting or it's not connecting to what is real, but it's the artists themselves. You know, I have a friend not a friend, a cousin who I was interested in pursuing more study in ecological criticism. And I shared this with him. I thought he would find it very interesting. He is himself completely ecologically minded, farmer, very like hands-on. And he told me, go outside and put your hands in the dirt. Whatever you're doing, stop. Like all of that is just cerebral. It's just separation. Go outside and put your hands in the dirt. And so sometimes now I will use that as a little bit of a mantra when I find myself going, okay, where am I in myself, in my work? Like, have my hands been in the dirt enough? Have I taken the risk to say or to do or to move in a certain particular way? And it would be remiss of me to not talk about like a movement encouraged by Joko on this actual residency. We're in a speeding boat going back to the mainland of Abaco, and I really want to talk more with people who are doing this migration between some of the islands in this area, because one of the islands we went to, we were chasing a lighthouse. It's a beautiful island. It's grossly wealthy. And in the Caribbean, it matches exactly the demographic you would think is attached to that kind of gross wealth. And going back and forth between this island and the mainland is the speeding boat that everybody ferries on. I end up getting into a conversation at Joko's insistence. Joko was like, just go and talk to that person, go and talk to that person. So I go and I sit down and have this conversation with this man who turns out to be a builder who had come across from Nassau to Abaco post-Dorian. And he shared with me the reality of what living and working in that space in the aftermath of a hurricane and working particularly with undocumented Haitian migrants who the country had done everything that they could to kill, vanish, or disappear. And by kill, I mean, if you completely disregard an entire group and you don't give them the governmental protections or structures needed to build and to live a life, and then a hurricane destroys them, you have killed them. Like that to me is murder. So at the end of the day, this conversation that I had with this man fills in the gaps that nobody else wants me to see, right? And I think in a way, what is required in moving as an artist is to go to those places where the gaps will be filled. Because so often we talk and we speak from a place of separation and abstraction, because that's what the work sometimes is about. And that's where the work happens. It's cerebral, it's separate, it's in our heads. And we think about things and we talk about things and we write about things and we're still over here. We haven't really gone into the society. We haven't really stepped into the rail. And I think now more than ever, the political demands of writing means that we can't fuel and devour and produce writing that isn't going to do that. Because there's so much content that is so superficial and so the difference between a hamburger and a full satiating meal, right? We should be working and writing meals. That's what we should be doing.
I think you've given us then, in what seems like a relatively tiny document, an entire feast, a feast that takes into account that when we sit at the table of living in this world, we sit at this table together as Caribbean people, and parts of the world are on fire, and parts of it are underwater, and governments lie to us, and people die, and people will always be dying. And also, we get to live in this Caribbean where the primeval forest exists, where there are synchronicities of love among plants that have always depended on each other. And that if poisonwood and gamalemi have found a way to be lovers across time, there are still miraculously ways for us to love each other and attend to each other in this crisis. Thank you for this work, Ark. Thank you for everything it gives, for everything it refuses to conceal. I can't wait for as many people as can attain it to be with it, to be with what you and Joko have made. And I know it will have resonance. And however much world is left to us, I think if we have texts exactly like this one, we may not have comfort, but we will have radical honesty. And maybe that is the most comforting thing of all.
Thank you, Shivanee.
Slide back in here. It's so beautiful. Before we wrap up, can I ask you to read?
Of course.
Do you want to read this one? Or is that too hard?
Which one?
25.
Yeah, of course. So this is in reference to the document that I mentioned that was built and created by developers for the triangulation of useful land when the water has risen. Discovering the newest model of sea level rise, I slide the scale like a digital dam. Inundate New Providence with 1 foot of water, then 2 feet, then 20. The computer model is designed so that developers can decide what land would be useful/profitable in this inevitable future. It is a game, this sliding scale. Move it from island to island. Find New York, Miami. It is like playing God, drowning a city with enough sea to crack it into 1,000 islands. I cannot stop. Heart races. The grief is simply too enormous, and these islands are so frail in this digital imagining. It is a map of their unbecoming, like a new colonial document. I cannot stop. Slide the scale until there is no Bahamas, no Barbados. It does not take very long.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So for me now, it's just to wrap up and say thank you so much. Thank you for the full meal that you've given us. Both of you have given us. Thank you to Panta Rhea for supporting the inaugural Lucayan Archipelago Residency, to Sonia Farmer and the Poinciana Paper Press for hosting Ark and Joko, so that this really beautiful compilation of words and this object, which we haven't said, is also dyed using the avocado pits and skins. And thank you so much to Shivanee for hosting the exchange with Ark and for being dissidents, colleagues who are dissidents. Yeah, there's so much to feel in reading A Prayer in Motion, and I think for the existential grief that many of us are experiencing, I think it gives us something to hold on to, and it reminds us of the profound love that we have for this part of the world. And thank you so much to Kayla Archer, who is our tech person managing everything in the background. And thank you to everyone for joining us.